Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety Management Professional Summit. My name is Sarah, and I will be your moderator for today. We'll get started in just a moment, but first I'd like to go over some information. First, a quick reminder of all the benefits that come with your annual subscription to safetyexecutives.com. Live monthly web meetings, which I assume you know about because you're attending one right now. However, if you are ever unable to attend live, we do record and upload these for viewing whenever is convenient for you. You can get to know your other members, log in to see profiles, and we're glad to make any introductions. If you're wrestling with key issues or decisions, we strongly encourage you to reach out to the other members. It's very easy to post questions, and our community of fellow professionals is always happy to help. After each meeting, we will generate summaries with key takeaways and learning nuggets so you can easily reference them and put them into action. There are many benefits, but I did want to highlight just a few. If at any time Oh, wait, that doesn't apply for this one. Now onto the good stuff. Ken is the Global Health and Safety Manager for International Paper, a global leader in paper and packaging headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee. With 40 years of experience in environmental health and safety, both in state and federal government positions, as well as having spent the last 29 years in paper manufacturing, Ken is eminently qualified as an industry expert in health and safety. Ken is currently responsible for global safety, industrial hygiene, and chemical process safety programs at International Paper and is the chief architect and project leader for the company's successful LIFE initiative, a company-wide program to reduce or eliminate the behaviors and conditions that lead to serious injuries and fatalities. And now I will turn it over to Ken.
Thank you, Sarah. What we'll be doing is going through each one of my slides. We don't see it in front of us for me, so I'm going to just set it up for myself so I can toggle through my slides. And I noticed that some of them are not numbered, but I'll just tell you when I'm changing the slide, and I'll tell you the slide number, although we may not see it at the bottom of the page on a couple, but that's no problem.
Sounds perfect.
Again, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right,
I said sounds perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm pulling my slides up, but I'm just going to go through them. And I'll tell folks when I'm moving on to the next slide and page number, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining and letting me present today. Again, as mentioned, Ken Joerger here from International Paper. And today's program, we're going to talk about our program, aptly named LIFE, or the acronym Life-Changing Injury and Fatality Elimination. And it's a program to address serious injuries and fatality prevention at International Paper. So I'll go to the first slide, which is number 2, just to give us a little introduction or overview on who we are at International Paper. I still feel we're probably the largest paper company in the world. We say we're one of the world's leading producers of fiber-based packaging, pulp and paper. We've got more than 50,000 employees and more than 25,000 customers in 150 countries. And we've got manufacturing operations all across the globe, from Russia to Brazil, up to Canada, and a large presence, obviously, in the United States. So what do we produce? Mostly what we consider commodities. We produce packaging products that protect and promote goods. So anytime any of us are receiving a package from Amazon, that's one of our big customers. That's why the business is doing really well this year. Everybody is going online, purchasing products, putting them in a corrugated or a cardboard box, and Amazon is shipping them right to our door. So that's our main line of business lately, so packaging products. The other product line is pulp that we produce for diapers, incontinence products, tissues, and other personal hygiene products, again, to promote health and wellness, as we would say. And then lastly, which was the mainstay of the business, making paper, communications paper, Xerox paper, that we call uncoated free sheet. There's one of our brands, Hammer Mill. You may see it on the shelves. And we also, so again, we make communications papers, and that's kind of our third line of business. So that's kind of the overview. And obviously, I think we've got over 200 what we consider container plants making boxes, those facilities across the globe, as well as over 30 some odd pulp and paper mills located in various locations. So those of us that drive around the countryside, occasionally you'll see international paper manufacturing facilities, even from the roadside. So that's who we are and what we do from the manufacturing standpoint. So now we'll go into safety at International Paper. And I want to preface this that back in 2010, so it's been a while, it's been over 10 years now that we since launched this LIFE program. And we launched what we consider this LIFE initiative. We gave it this name. It was aptly labeled, and our campaign was always, it's about life, it's about human life that we were concerned with. And we considered it at that time, it was going to be a multi-year effort. I didn't have any false notions that it was going to be something within a couple of years we were going to solve all of these problems. And here it is 10 years later, and we're still on our journey to try to eliminate serious injuries and fatalities. And so it's an effort to identify and mitigate, right, reduce the potential hazards and risks associated with serious injuries and fatalities. And how did this come about? I'm going to go to the next slide, which I think will be, well, maybe the third slide will help us out. But let me just kind of mention that just prior to this 2010 initiative, the company was celebrating kind of a milestone for us for safety. We were always targeted, like many firms, on the OSHA incident rates, and in particular, the most broad incident rate that they have is what they call the total incident rate, or TIR, and it's logging all the recordable injuries, those that are medical or above. And we were reaching a point where we were finally, after many, many years, we received or had experienced a TIR of less than 1, and we were celebrating. And we celebrated that year with great fanfare that we were reducing our injuries way down below 1% of all of our population would be injured. And so that was, we consider that a big success. But I started taking a look at this and it realized that behind these numbers, this 1%, there was still a number of serious injuries, amputations, and serious bodily harm and fatalities that were occurring that kind of get hidden in this TIR statistic. And that's when we decided that we really needed to focus on reducing these serious injuries and how to do that. And it wasn't going to happen by just focusing on all injuries. We had to have a renewed focus on just these serious injuries. Why are they occurring and how could we prevent them? So we go to slide 4. And so we had to come up with, well, what is our definition of life and what's our life goal? Now, one thing that we did do was we had a number of serious injuries that was still occurring, what we would consider chronic injuries like back injuries and musculoskeletal injuries that were very costly from a workers' compensation standpoint. But we needed a definition for life and injuries to focus on that were basically immediate, and we would know them right away if something happened. That was our focus. So while we're not ignoring musculoskeletal injuries and those types of things like back injuries that are very costly for us, we needed to focus on something immediate and acute. And so we focused on those incidents that cause serious harm, and typically you would know that right away. So our definition for a life incident, which is what we were going to focus on and reduce, obviously fatality, that's the top of the pyramid there. We also considered amputations. That's another obvious one. And if you noticed over the years, at least in the U.S., OSHA's been very noteworthy in terms of their reporting requirements around fatalities and now even amputations and hospitalizations. So very serious situations fatalities, amputations. And then we've also included in our life definition injuries that resulted in organ damage, concussion or brain trauma, bone fractures. So that seems to be a very large number of our incidents where folks have fractures and broken bones. Crushing injuries, we even have some situations where there is degloving, and that's basically taking the skin off of the bone. And then any serious second or third degree burn, we will evaluate those. And if they're life-threatening, we would consider that a life incident. And of course, we had a goal, and that was we needed a lofty goal. And so this is aspirational, if you want to say that, life-changing injuries, and we want to reduce these injuries and fatalities to zero. So that's kind of an aspirational goal, and that's where we're headed. So slide number 5, let's look at our IP safety performance, including life events, sort of take a look at, and this kind of highlights one of the reasons why we decided to focus on serious injuries and fatalities. And by the way, a number of companies are doing this, and a number of consulting firms are out there preaching programs. They call them, in some cases, SIFs, serious injuries and fatalities, SIF programs. You may have heard that. Large behavioral-based safety type programs are focusing on this as well. BST in particular, that I believe is merged with DECRA, and they've got a lot of efforts going on in the SIF arena as well. So safety performance, you notice I mentioned that TIR had come way down, and so we were getting down below 1, and we were celebrating, but at the same time we were still having these very serious injuries and fatalities. And if you look at the orange line, that's where it gave an indication that we were plateauing on the serious injuries, the lost time rates, and that's where we would see very serious injuries in lost time cases as well as fatalities. Okay, so since that was plateauing, obviously we weren't making much progress. We made great progress in reducing all of the recordable injuries, such as anything as simple as a bee sting to a simple medical first or second degree burn. And so we were reducing those significantly, way down, but we weren't focused at the time because we had our eye on a different ball on the very serious injuries and fatalities. So that's kind of, and if you can see, we've made pretty good progress in reducing, but for this spike that we see in 2018, we've sort of reduced our total life cases, and we've got them broken down here, gray being employee life incidents. And then we started, if you noticed, in 2011, we started cataloging and logging in the contractor serious life incidents as well. So as you can tell, we've reduced, this is a steady progress. It's taken us this long to get this far. And if you notice, year to date, 20, we only have a number or a handful of cases that are serious in the life category. So we've made very good progress, but it's taken 10 years. Initially, I thought that we would reduce our numbers by 50% in 3 years, and obviously that wasn't going to happen. And it's still a journey, and our goal is to get down to 0. So we've had a steady decline since life was first initiated in 2010. So that's kind of the takeaway. So I think we've made some pretty good progress based on some of the things that we've done. And we'll go into some of those in a little more detail. So first thing that came up was, okay, how are folks getting seriously injured and or having fatalities? And they fell in what we consider five buckets or focus areas. Machine safeguarding, we have a lot of equipment, and folks were getting their hands caught up in machines, and sometimes, and occasionally, they would get caught up in machines, and we had fatalities associated with machine safeguarding. Falls, both falls from height as well as falls on the ground level. That was another significant area where folks were seriously being injured, and or we've had some fatal injuries in that area as well. Motorized equipment, mainly around powered industrial trucks, as we all know. These things are very unforgiving, and if they collide with a pedestrian, there's tremendous injury potential. We also saw that since we're sort of a pulp and paper industry, it's basically a very large chemical plant. And so there are chemicals and exposures where we are exposed to harmful substances and or other environments. And so we saw a number of serious cases related to gas exposures and heat-related issues and some other damaging areas. And then lastly, I included driver safety because we've had a few on the road fatalities, and it was another way to engage all our employees in this program because this is really focused in manufacturing, but we needed something that our sales force and our everyday office employees might be able to get their hands around. And so driver safety was another big focus area for us and one of 5 initiatives. So those are the initial 5 focus areas where we saw serious injuries and fatalities. The risks were associated in these buckets, and we needed to tackle this with a focused program, and that's where the LIFE program came into play. Okay, so these 5 focus areas again, if we look at, we have full year data for 2019, and so this is kind of looking at where these injuries are now currently falling, life events. So in 2019, we had a total of 20. And as you can see, the bulk of them are still in the machine safeguarding area. We still have individuals that potentially not locking out machines or taking risks associated with machinery. And we're still seeing some amputations and or serious hand and arm injuries related to machine safeguarding. Again, falls. But the good thing about falls, not that it's good, where we initially started out in 2010, we had a lot of falls from heights, but we initiated a number of programs to address that with fall protection and some other programs. And so we don't normally see falls from heights anymore, but this 35% represents falls from the same level. If somebody trips and falls and breaks a bone, for example. So those are the 2 big areas that we still need to tackle. We still have 5% in the motorized equipment area. So forklifts are still an issue. 10% still in the harmful substances and environments. Lots of chemical burns and those types of things. And then 20% in the other category, which get characterized as struck by falling objects, pinch between 2 objects, not necessarily associated with machinery, or other material handling incidents. So these are the areas that we still need to tackle. And the big ones, obviously, are machine safeguarding and falls from the same level. So I go on to slide number 8. This is always the gorilla in the room, where before we initiated this LIFE program, very little was said about fatalities that occurred in our industry, and in particular within IP. Not that they were covered up, but it wasn't something of discussion. And since the program came into play, I think that's a very good thing. We now highlight that we did have and currently occasionally have fatalities, and those are obviously very life-changing for employees and or contractors. And before this program started, I think we were averaging about 4.5 fatalities a year. Obviously very unacceptable. And as you can see, as we started out in this program, we were still seeing a number of fatalities, and it took a number of years to try to tackle and address and reduce these. And as you can see, we've made, at least within the last several years, what we consider considerable progress. We did have a blip in 2018 where we had 3 contractor fatalities, so that's the gray bar. And this year, 2020, at the beginning of the year, we had 2 employee fatalities related to machine safeguarding in operations that were outside the U.S. So at least within the U.S., we've had a couple of years where we have not seen, as we've seen in the past, 4 or 5 fatalities a year. So very good progress, at least from what we can see, addressing fatalities. But these are very typically unusual situations that show up. And we can talk about where these we typically see and some of the causes associated with fatalities and how that may differ from some of the other injuries. So I will move on to our slide number 9. And let's talk a little bit about fatalities and some of the analyses that we've done over the years to try to figure out why we're still seeing fatalities. Obviously, the pulp and paper industry is a high risk, high hazard industry. Lots of moving equipment, lots of activities, lots of contracted work, basically large manufacturing chemical facilities, and the risks are always present, and we need programs and systems in place, obviously, so that we can eliminate and not have these very serious events. So our focus areas, again, for fatality analysis showed us that we really needed to focus on these three things: machine safeguarding and ZES, which is zero energy state, what you folks may term lockout tagout, folks not properly locking out equipment, going inside to address a jam or something like that, and may take a risk. And then sure enough, the machines are very unforgiving, and we've seen loss of limbs and loss of fingers and other serious crushing injuries associated with machines. So that's a focus area that really needed to be addressed. Other focus areas, again, we were seeing fatalities related to falling from heights. Typically, we fall from ground level. We may break a few bones, but they're typically not life-threatening or life-changing. But falling from heights, very unforgiving, and doesn't take much in terms of the distance of a fall, but depending on where you land, can be fatal. So that was another focus area to address fatalities at our company, falls from heights. And then lastly, lots of forklifts, lots of forklift traffic, lots of pedestrian forklift interaction. And occasionally the two would meet, and it was not a good thing. So we were seeing some fatalities associated with our motorized equipment, mainly around what we consider powered industrial trucks, forklifts that are moving large paper rolls, and the like. Okay, so those are the focus areas that we needed to tackle and get our arms around and make sure we had solid programs in those three areas to address where we were seeing people dying in our mills and other plants. The other thing that we've identified that is that about half our fatalities are associated with what we consider non-routine work. Not the everyday production work. It was a machine went down and we had to go in and repair it. Non-routine maintenance work, again, unplanned, requires a lot of attention to detail, and because programs and procedures may not necessarily be in place to address the risks, we see again that non-routine work was a very large factor, and so this had to be addressed and looked at. Working alone was another theme that was identified in the majority of our fatalities. A lot of these workers that had died alone, was working alone, and possibly if they had another person with them, they might together have looked out for each other. And folks alone are making decisions by themselves. So that was another common theme. And then we had to look at ways, how can we address folks working alone to make sure that they understood the risks associated with working alone in high-risk situations and how to mitigate some of those risks. So there was some training associated with that as well over the years. And then lastly, some rules and procedures that may not have been followed. So big training efforts. In some cases, the risks or the hazards were not clearly recognized. So we had to do lots of training in how to train employees on how to recognize risks in their work areas. There's also risk tolerance. Some folks had a high tolerance for risk, and that needed to be addressed from a behavioral standpoint. And then lastly, rule violation, actually violating some of the rules that were in place and some of our, what we might consider cardinal rules or our life rules or life-changing types of procedures in place, like lockout. It's an absolute, it's not forgiving. You can't bend that rule. It has to be strictly adhered to. If we have to lock out the machine before we go in, it has to be perfect. So rule violation is another thing that had to be addressed to make sure that all our policies and procedures were being followed and followed correctly. So that's kind of an analysis of the types of things that we saw that was generating fatalities, and we tried to address each one of these with a number of programs and initiatives as well over the years. Our life model that we would consider was looking at three major elements: leadership, employee engagement, and equipment and processes. So from the leadership standpoint, obviously safety is a core value and priority for us at IP. And so we spent a lot of time with our frontline leaders, training them what we called safety leadership training, and we included a certification with that training. We needed a foundation of good leaders that were good safety models and that could follow and coach folks as to what needs to be done the right way. So leadership was a very important component to this life model. Employee engagement, obviously a very large factor, and all employees needed to be engaged in this process. Again, we went through training on hazard recognition, using our behavioral-based observation program so folks could recognize both behavior and conditions that would generate serious injuries and fatalities. So a very strong program at IP today. And of course, communications. Communicate, 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 whether that be failure, incidents that we've had, or successes. And then lastly, overriding all of this is our facilities and all the equipment and processes that are associated with the company and all the hazards associated with those. Again, pulp and paper industry still considered a high hazard industry, and we need to recognize some of these high hazard risks and put in hazard control measures. We've set up some new equipment specifications around machine safeguarding and the like. And then, of course, all our life elements and programs that we put in place for life had recommendations that needed to be complied with. And so our project teams had made recommendations, and then all facilities had to adhere to these recommendations with what we consider life programs that would address some of these high-risk hazards. So that's kind of our life model that got us to where we are today. Looking at some of the supporting efforts for life, we see obviously it has to be bordered both by safety leadership, and that was both senior leaders as well as our frontline leaders, but in particular our frontline leaders with large emphasis on training, safety leadership training. Every frontline leader was put through a series of safety leadership training, several modules, several years worth of efforts, and includes the certification for those frontline leaders. Obviously, the foundation, again, like leadership, is employee engagement, and those two things are a given. But here are some of the supporting efforts. Each one of our life focus areas, we generated global performance standards and program elements to address some of those high risks and put requirements and procedures in place that everyone needed to adhere to. Contractor safety, since we were starting to also focus on contractor serious injuries and fatalities, we generated a very large effort around contractor safety. And I believe we have probably one of the best contractor safety programs in the industry today as a result of moving them into the LIFE program. Communications, again, large communication efforts, and around LIFE, and we can talk about a little bit of those coming in some coming slides. Human and organizational performance. You may have heard about this, HOP, where we understand that employees make mistakes, and we need to figure out why they're doing that and ensure that they're doing the right things all the time. And so we've embraced some of the new thinking around human and organizational performance in generating some of our procedures and programs. Hazard recognition and control, again, I mentioned there's lots of training around recognizing hazards and addressing them. And then lastly, we'll have a slide on safety leading indicators. Typically, folks, when they're looking at metrics, they typically in the past look at only lagging metrics like OSHA TIR and LWR, and even this life count that we have is a lagging metric, but we needed to go upstream and do more proactive measures, look at some things that were actually driving some of these improvements. So we generated a series of what we call safety leading indicators, 7 of them, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Here's a little bit now. Slide number 12 is our 7 safety leading indicators. We came up with these 7 that we felt was going to drive safety performance at IP. Again, we talked about hazard recognition and mitigation, and we have metrics. For example, if you read some of the detail here, for example, the percentage of employees who have received hazard recognition training, it's a gate question, and then report the number of high-risk hazards mitigated. So that's a metric that all sites have to generate and compile and submit to the company, and we track improvements in each one of these areas. We also have life incidents, but also, if you notice, there's a lot of near misses that happen that don't generate a life event, but it could well have become a life event, and we call those life potentials. And so we're driving folks to really take a look at those incidents, those near misses, and if they have potential for life, they're categorized as a life potential, and there's some additional requirements around investigations and communicating those incidents across the globe. We have our Safe Work Observation Program, or BBS programs, and so it's continuing to push those. Contractor safety is another element. 5S performance, we track that. And obviously, a neat and orderly workplace will help safety and safety culture. Again, we talked at length about safety leadership training and continuing the certification program. And life project plan execution, we generate an overall score for each facility, how well they're implementing some of these life focus area program requirements. So between those 7 items, they get tracked, and we're looking for improvement in each one of those 7, and it's helping to drive our safety performance. Every year we look at this and make modifications on the 7. We'll probably stick with the 7 for a while, but over the years we've changed them up a little bit. But these are the 7 that we've kind of focused on, and we'll probably continue for a bit more time. And then as things get improved, we may move into another one if we find something else that we need to address. So these are our 7 leading indicators. And again, we need both lagging and leading indicators to help drive safety performance, but this is more preventive and earlier. It's an early warning signal that something is either improving or getting worse, and we don't want to wait till we have a serious event. So these are the 7 that we're working on. There are 7 safety leading indicators. So that was slide 12. When we talk about communications, one of the things that we've done is we've generated for every life event a life lesson, a 1-page report that we can send out to each one of the facilities when an incident occurs that's a life event. And we talked about near misses as well. And so what I don't have here is we've got a life near miss, but now we also have a communication tool around life potentials. So these life lessons, again, a 1-page communication tool, and each one of those serious events, whether they be a near miss, a life potential, or an actual life event itself, have to go through some rigorous incident investigations and root cause analysis to get to the root cause so we can prevent these from occurring again. So this is something we've been doing for probably the last 10 years, and it's been very effective. As far as human and organizational performance, I'm just going to give you sort of an example of sort of what we're talking about here. When we look at HOP type principles, we typically look at prevention and recovery, and what are the types of things that we put in place to prevent an incident? What kind of systems can we put in place to detect and correct during the process? And then lastly, recovery. So if we look at an example here, our line breaking example, where someone has to go in and, let's say, break into a chemical line, there needs to be a series of procedures, and we've included a very large, robust permitting process and personal protective equipment requirement for that every time we break into a line, that nobody gets hurt. So on the prevention side, there's training and contractor orientation on our program for line breaking. There's pre-job safety assessments associated with that. We need to isolate the line, for example, double block and bleed it, drain, vent, and purge it, verify that that is been drained and vented properly. We need a permit. We require 2 signatures on that permit. Then we have this thing, what we call a rumble strip. If we're driving down the road and we venture off a little bit on the side of the highway, you notice that there's a rumble strip, and it's to alert you that you've gone too far. So in this particular case, we have a stop work criteria that if something isn't going right during this process, all employees are required to stop work, re-engage, figure out what's going on, and put some systems in place to make sure that nothing goes wrong. So for us, a rumble strip for line breaking is a stop work criteria. And then lastly, should all else fail, how can we recover so that we don't generate a serious injury? And so we've got a number of programs in place or requirements for this program. Obviously, line break PPE is all specified. We don't take that PPE off until the line is open and verified safe to work on. We've got an exclusion zone outside of the actual work. If you notice, this picture shows a little barrier. I think we require 15 feet where no one can really get inside unless you're wearing that line break PPE. We need folks to evaluate, if something goes wrong, do they have an escape route? If something goes wrong and we get chemicals splashed in our eyes or on our body and PPE isn't protective enough, then we need to know where the nearest safety shower is and make sure she's working. We talk about body positioning, and we also require an attendant, just like a confined space attendant, a standby person should something go wrong. So this is just an example of using some of the top principles for accident prevention, okay? And the example I used here was our line breaking program that we put in place. And that's one of our focus areas was chemical, hazardous environments and the chemical exposures. And we've had a lot of chemical burns associated with folks breaking into lines, not having the proper PPE, not doing the proper prep work, and the like, okay? Okay, here's a number of interventions that we have associated with our life focus areas. So machine safeguarding, just to go down through a few of them. We have inspection programs, guarding specs, global lockout implementation requirements, and we've been upgrading equipment with guards and the like. So that's how we're addressing machine safeguarding. Motorized equipment, we instituted programs around traffic flow risk assessments, and I'll show you a couple of slides on that in a bit. Pedestrian segregation, keeping pedestrians away from trucks, operator training, and dock safety. Driver safety, we have a performance standard associated with driving on the road. We have a ban on use of cell phone while driving on company business. We have distracted driver training, and we have an awareness campaign. Falls, we have a lot of folks that were falling from trucks that were tarping trucks, so we have a truck tarping program. We have a roof access permit process, so anybody that's working on a roof, they need to be either tied off or separated or segregated away from the edge. And we have a fall hazard risk assessment process requiring that determines what kind of fall protection would be necessary when we're working from heights. And then lastly, harmful substances and environment. We've got 3 areas in that category: electrical safety, because we were having electrical burns and electrocutions in some rare cases, but lots of shocks. Confined space entry, we've had a lot of incidents associated with that. And the chemical side, we talked about chemical burns, chemical splashes, and the like. So there's our 5 focus areas and some of the programs that we put in place to sort of address that. More detail. I'm going to focus a little bit on motorized equipment. And here's a slide on slide 16 at our Springfield container mill in Springfield, Oregon, that if you notice, this is the traffic pattern. Red is the mobile equipment traveling around the mill, and if you notice, the blue is the pedestrian walkways. And what's the obvious thing that we see? Lots of interaction, lots of areas where both can come in close contact with each other and potentially have some collisions. This traffic flow risk assessment process lets you evaluate all of the risks and the traffic flows and see if you could rearrange the traffic to try to improve the situation. So the next slide, slide 17, shows our post-traffic traffic flow risk assessments in completion. And if you notice, we've got forklifts going in one direction, employees going in another, and there's obviously some areas where there needs to be some interaction, but not as much as we've had in the past before this traffic flow risk assessment. So this has been very positive, and we've done this throughout the facilities, both outside as well as inside the facilities. Okay. Here's an example, slide number 18, for a parking lot post-TIFRA. So if you notice, we did this in a lot of our parking lots, assign pedestrian walkways, have stanchions and chains, and basically directing folks to safe areas that they can walk even in and out of parking lots so they don't collide with even vehicles coming to and from work. That's slide 18. Slide 19, again, lots of efforts, lots of money being spent across the company, isolating pedestrians from powered industrial trucks, using physical barriers, cameras, mirrors, a whole host of other electronics to try to keep pedestrians away from powered industrial trucks. So this has been very helpful and and we've seen great progress because we don't see too many serious injuries associated with powered industrial trucks running into pedestrians any longer. So that's slide number 18. And then as far as electronics, we've kind of focused in on this particular collision avoidance electronic gadgetry, if you want to call it, and it's called the hit-knock proximity detection, where employees will wear a device, the driver is wearing another device, and when the two of them come close together, there is some detection and warnings so that we can avoid these types of collisions. So in certain areas like warehouses and other areas where there's lots of pedestrian and pit interaction, there's a requirement for both a high-vis vest, as you see here, as well as the wearing of this hit-knock device. So this has been very effective, and I've listed here a little link if anyone is interested in that to take a look at that. It's been a very effective program for us. And then lastly, on the communication side, once a year, during the whole month of November, we kind of stop what we're doing and we remember our life program, and we look at November as our life month. And here is when all our team members kind of recommit to safety and recommit to life, and they each sort of generate different programs and activities associated with their safety programs and what they're doing to improve the reduction of serious injuries and fatalities at their facilities. And so there's a large communication and activity-based communication effort, and we call it Life Month, and that's our month of November. And we've just finished that up and all across the globe, and then we share successes and some of the things that they've been doing to try to encourage folks to work safe all year long, but we focus on the month of November in particular on our life program. So that's kind of where we ended up. And I guess we didn't get any questions during the session, but I see we've got at least 10 minutes here. So Sarah, we can open it up for questions, and I'm willing to answer any question that anyone that might have.
Great. So I did get a couple chat questions, and let me start by, with the life model, how did you get the buy-in from management? I assume that in general it kind of trickles down from management to the employees, but how did you get their buy-in?
Well, I can tell you that it wasn't all that difficult. Once we
Makes sense.
Once we presented the data to show that these are where we're seriously injuring folks, and presenting for the first time, here's all the fatalities and why they're occurring, it didn't take very much for them to sanction, yes, we need to go ahead and do this. And so we initially set up a leadership team. It's called a life implementation team. And from that, it generated a life steering team that had all our vice presidents on that team, the steering team, to drive this whole program. So from the CEO down to the frontline leaders, we didn't really have too much, what I consider much of a problem. initially, they jumped right on the fact that our frontline leaders needed some safety training, and so they sanctioned a very large expenditure to bring in an outside consultant to train everyone in safety leadership. So I can say that from the leadership standpoint, that was not a tough sell. Of course, the bigger sell was trying to get employees to pay more attention, obviously, to some of these programs. We needed large training efforts, hazard recognition, behavioral-based safety observation programs. That took a little bit longer to get employees engaged. And then when it came to HOP, the human and organizational performance, where before folks would say someone got hurt, they would initially, well, let's blame the employee. They weren't following the rules. But with some of the new training that we've done under human and organizational performance, our leaders have now recognized that employees do make mistakes. Some of it is us generating improper procedures or incorrect procedures, not holding people accountable. And so I say in all of these areas, leadership has stepped up and actually have been driving the programs. And so I think, to me, that wasn't a major effort. We had support from my boss, their bosses, all across up to the CEO. And I think they've recognized that this was a very important effort. And especially when we started, bringing their attention that, for example, holding one meeting with some senior leaders, and then as they're sitting there around the table, senior leaders, we said, okay, that table number 5, everybody raised their hands. And then they'd raise their hands and say, well, okay, you've got 10 people on that table. Let's count the number of fingers. And well, that's the number of fingers that we've lost in the last 3 years. Some of those things really hit home, and they recognize that, wow, this doesn't necessarily have to be. And yes, we need to tackle this. There's no reason why folks should go home injured and seriously injured and have these life-threatening and life-changing impacting injuries at our facility. So I think that was an easy sell for senior leaders. And again, trying to get everyone to do the right thing all the time, that's the big effort. And we continue to do that. Good question.
Yeah, makes sense. And let's see, it looks like we've got time for one more, and I think this is perfect from what you just said. So in the beginning of your talk, you discussed how this was originally going to be, just a short-term, figure it out, fix it, move on, sort of situation, and now it seems to be more long-term. Do you think that the LIFE program will ever be done, or do you think it is something that's going to grow and change with the changes in the industry and be a thing for forever?
Yes. Now, I was naive to think that, wow, we should be able to tackle this and within a couple of years address it and bring it down to something super reasonable, maybe not zero, because that's always difficult to say you're going to get to zero. There'll always be some harm somewhere, some unexpected situation that might generate some serious injury. But that was an eye-opener for me that this is sort of a journey. So we've kind of watched this journey, and we're kind of following, there's another model that I don't have up here, that you start out compliance and reactive and then proactive, and you reach a point where you've got a resilient organization, that you built the programs in place that even if there is an incident, you can recover from it and not have a serious injury. So in other words, you build in a lot of redundancy in your programs. Same thing with your cars today. There's so much redundancy on the safety side: seatbelts, airbags, side view detection, lane this and that. Crumbling in the front of the car. Eventually, they're going to make Volvos saying they're going to make a car where no one will get killed in, no matter what. So this is what we need to build in our safety programs, what we call resiliency, both of the employees, the procedures, their knowledge, everything that will generate enough resilience that no one will get hurt. So yes, this life may morph as we tackle and correct some of the serious areas in these focus areas, we may move into some others. And that's what happens is if you have a pie chart of incidents that have occurred, you notice that if you solve one problem, what's left gets a bigger share of the pie. So then you say, oh, I need to start tackling that, which I didn't see before because it was such a small percentage. Now that is a big issue. So where before falls from height was so big, we were focusing on that, and we weren't focusing on folks just tripping and having fractures because we were so busy trying to tackle falls from height. So as that pie chart gets bigger for that element, we start looking at that. So again, this will morph through time. Hopefully, life will have a life of itself and hopefully will disappear. And what we're going to see is sort of a resilient safety model or a safety program where we've got the programs and procedures in place and the employee knowledge, and that when something does go wrong, we've got redundancy that there won't be a serious event should that occur. So yes, it will morph, and I would have thought the LIFE program would have had, not so much ended, but it would be sort of moving away, but we still have things to address, so we'll still be around, but it's taken on some other things. You see it. It's taken on human and organizational performance. It's taken on safety leadership. It's taken on contractor safety. And all of a sudden, it's become larger than life, from what I can say. Yes.
Well, that is very exciting. We'll have to have you back in 5 years or so we can get an update and see how it's all going, because it all sounds very interesting, and I'm fascinated to hear more. And it looks like...
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Looks like we're getting close to your bewitching hour.
Yep, we are right on time. So I'm going to say thank you, Ken, so much.
Was able to follow. I hope everyone was able to follow my slides.
And
like I said, some of them were numbered.
Exactly. And I do have, I was able to record it so that people could see the slides. So if anybody does want to rewatch, it will have the slides in coordination with Ken's speech. And I would like to thank everybody for joining us today. Mainly Ken, thank you so much for taking the time out to give us this talk. And hopefully we will see or hear from everybody next month. And Ken, before I hit the button, do you have any final words?
No, just I see we've got an audience of safety professionals, and I say it's a big fight. And this year we've been focused obviously around COVID, and but we don't let these other programs slide. Just another thing to add to the plate, and hopefully everyone will keep safe. Hopefully we'll get out of this COVID pandemic, and for us, we're doing a lot of working from home, and we're not getting inside our facilities like we used to help folks get better. So hopefully next year we can get into our safety pros can get back into facilities and get back to business. So good luck, everybody, and keep safe.
Thank you so much, Ken, and thank you, everybody. And this is Sarah signing off.
Hey, thank you.
You are about to end this meeting. To end, press 1. To return